Okay, starting with the first thing that you see. This is going to be cerebellar gross anatomy. Okay? Cerebellar gross anatomy is going to be that way back when somebody first started looking at the brain, like we did, we pulled the brains from the cadavers, right? So what they did is they took the cerebellum off the back of the brain and they're just looking at it. Okay, just trying to identify different parts of the cerebellum. And this is just basic gross anatomy. So let's go ahead and start out on this left side of the page. And what you're looking at here is just a straight sagittal section. Only this is the brain stem, and back here is the cerebellum. Okay, so the uppermost part of the brain stem, what's that one called again? Midbrain, good. And then the middle part, pons. Okay, there's going to be some major connectors coming out of the pons to make connections with the cerebellum. There's one out of the midbrain and one out of the medulla too. Here's the medulla. Okay, and like I said, this one over here is going to be your cerebellum. Okay, and just looking at this side now, we'll worry about the other side here in a minute. So, basic parts of the cerebellum. If you're looking at the cerebellum from the front, you're going to be looking at it, the brain stem's in the way, so you can't really see it. If you look at it from the back, you see the back of the cerebellum, but you really don't see what's tucked in here behind the brain stem. Okay? But when you do a cross-section, then you can see that there's one special part of the cerebellum that's invisible from the front and the back unless you move the brain stem out of the way. And that's right there. And this is called, believe it or not, the flocculo, F-L-O-C-C-U-L-O, nodular, N-O-D-U-L-A-R, lobe. So, tucked back in there, behind the brain stem, basic part, one basic gross anatomical part of the cerebellum is the flocculo-nodular lobe. Okay, and all we're looking at is just basic parts of the cerebellum right now. You should also know there's another part of the cerebellum. The other part of the cerebellum, and you can see this one, it's going to be on the top part here. Okay, second basic part. Okay, this is on the top of the cerebellum, and this is known as your anterior lobe. A little bit easier than flocculo-nodular. Okay, so first part, tucked behind the brainstem, flocculo-nodular, on top, anterior lobe, and underneath the anterior lobe is going to be your posterior lobe. Okay, and that takes up the rest of the cerebellum territory. Now, if you kind of think about it, we talked about pica, posterior, inferior cerebellar artery. Well, pica supplies the posterior lobe, and ica, anterior, inferior cerebellar artery, supplies the anterior lobe. And that's where that comes from. So anterior lobe, and this is posterior. This is just basic gross anatomy, nothing more. No functions associated yet. We'll get the functions here in a minute. So three basic parts of the cerebellum: your flocculo-nodular lobe, your anterior lobe, and your posterior lobe. Okay? This is just straight sagittal section, up and down. Okay, now we move over. Let's take a look at this from the front. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take away this brainstem portion, and I'm going to take this piece and flip it up like that, and that's what this image is right here. Okay, so I've just taken the brainstem off of the front, and then I'm looking at the cerebellum from the front on. Everybody got that? See where I am? So when I do that, now I can see that floccular nodular lobe. But I start out with two great big white matter conduits here. Okay, these are great big white matter conduits that connect the cerebellum to the pons. Okay, and these are known as middle cerebellar peduncles. Remember that was a word that I used on the quiz last week. So peduncle. So what's a peduncle again? White matter tract. Yep. So these are big old white matter tracts. They're just nothing more than myelinated axons coming from the actually they're coming from the brainstem into the cerebellum. We're going to talk about those later and why they're so important. And then the other one. The other thing that we can see here is, like I said, we saw the flocculonodular lobe here. Now that we've removed the brainstem, we can go ahead and draw that in and take a look at it. And you know, when I first looked at the flocculonodular lobe, way back when I started teaching this content a while ago, I used to think that this looked like remember the wings that you get if you go in an airplane when you're a kid? Don't those look like airplane? And then one year, maybe 5 years ago, somebody said, that looks like something. What does that look like? Joker? Yeah. Anybody? That's a penguin in Madagascar. That's it right there. So, and then I saw it. It's like, oh yeah, cerebellum, penguin in Madagascar. So that's where that comes from. I laughed for a long time after I heard that. I just never thought about it before. Okay, so this right here is going to be your flocculonodular lobe. You can't see it in the first view because it's tucked behind the brainstem, but when you pick that brainstem up, it's just sitting right there. Yeah. And just like I said before, up top, you have your anterior lobe, so that occupies the top portion here. Okay, and you also have, put that in there. So here's your anterior lobe. Okay, basic gross anatomy, and then right underneath that, all together, is going to be your posterior lobe. And looking at it like, you just remove the brainstem and you're looking right back at the back part of the cerebellum, sitting in the back. Sometimes when you're looking at a textbook or an article about cerebellar anatomy, you'll see this with the brainstem removed. Oftentimes, though, they choose to show it from the back. So in other words, looking at the cerebellum from this angle, you're looking straight on. So the brainstem is still up front, but you're looking at it from the back. So everybody see that? So looking at it from this way, that's what this view is right here. And the thing is, when you look at it from the back like that, you're not able to see the flocculonodular lobe. So what they do is they just go ahead and put the flocculonodular lobe underneath to represent it. Okay, so this is looking at it from the back, and they've just taken the flocculonodular lobe and rolled it down, so you can still see it. So there it is. Okay, that's your flocculonodular lobe. But as you can see, if you look at it from the back, you only see the top part's the anterior lobe and the bottom part's the posterior lobe. So it's real basic as far as gross anatomy. 3 basic parts: anterior, posterior, and flocculonodular lobes. Anterior. And then posterior. And like I said, came up with these names when they were just looking at the cerebellum. They didn't really know what it did. They knew it was part of the brain, but they were just trying to make sense of it, and so they divided it into gross anatomical parts: anterior, posterior, flocculonodular. Questions about that? It's just what you see. Just gross anatomy of the cerebellum. And like I said, the ICA was named because it supplies the anterior lobe, which is on top, and pica was named because it supplies the posterior lobe. We move on. All right, let's look at the next one. The next one's going to be cerebellar functional regions and nuclei. Okay, and just like we started out before, I have two things here. On this side, I'm going to draw the cerebellar functional regions, and I'm going to start here on the left side of the page. So thinking about function, different parts of the cerebellum, not necessarily associated with anatomy, have different functions. Okay, the first one is going to be this flocculonodular lobe. And again, this is just a representation looking at the cerebellum from the back. So you can see my flocculonodular lobes rolled down here. And as I mentioned before, this is going to be my flocculonodular lobe. Flocculonodular lobe has a very specific function. Okay, it's associated with an important part of cerebellar function, and it's known as a functional region. The flocculonodular lobe is called the vestibulocerebellum. Vestibulocerebellum. Does anybody know anything about the vestibular system? Sorry? Balance, right. So this is going to be, this functional region, the flocculonodular vestibulocerebellum, is all about balance. It's hooked up to your vestibular system in your inner ear. We're going to look at that in a minute. But when you hear vestibulocerebellum or flocculonodular lobe, think balance. Okay, that's going to be the main component, or the main thing that's responsible for balance, or knowing where your head is in three-dimensional space. Vestibular system. Got that? Okay, now let's look at another region. This is, again, a functional region. In this functional region, if you look to see, there's two little bumps here on the top and bottom of the cerebellum. I'm going to go ahead and connect those bumps just with a dotted line. And inside that dotted line, that whole area, it's kind of like the spine, if you will, the very middle of the cerebellum. Okay, it has a special name. It's called a vermis. V-E-R-M-I-S. Okay, that's the vermis of your cerebellum. Okay. Way back when we were looking at the spinal cord cross sections, we were talking about the cerebellum receiving information from the dorsal and ventral spinal cerebellar tracts. Does anybody remember that stuff? Okay. And thinking about the spinocerebellar tracts, this is going to be the area that's associated with those dorsal and ventral spinocerebellar tracts. Now, what do those tracts carry? Anybody remember? Non-conscious proprioception. Good. So this is going to be non-conscious or unconscious proprioception information. It processes it. but specifically from the trunk musculature, so axial musculature. Okay, so any information from your trunk musculature goes into your cerebellum and it communicates with the vermis of the cerebellum, which is right smack in the middle. And then just outside the vermis, you have another area. It's pretty easy to remember. It's called your paravermal area, P-A-R-A. Vermal. And that's going to be here in the blue on both sides. There's a right and a left side associated with it. So this is your paravermal area, and it's also associated with the dorsal and spinal cerebellar tracts. And it carries non-conscious proprioception. But the vermis does trunk, so what do you think the paravermal is associated with? Extremities. There you go. Non-conscious proprioception of extremities, both upper and lower extremities. Okay, anything that isn't axial musculature is considered paravermal. Okay. And both the paravermal area and the vermal area together, since they both deal with non-conscious proprioception, whether it's trunk or extremities, that's considered another kind of functional area. And I'll put these together here. This is called your spinocerebellum. No different than dorsal and spinal cerebellar tracts. That's your spinocerebellum. So your spinal cerebellum receives information through your dorsal and ventral spinal cerebellar tracts and communicates information or receives information coming in about how your trunk and extremities, all your joints, are positioned in three-dimensional space without you even looking. It's constant information coming in from your body. Questions? Okay, moving on. Then the last region here is going to be on the outside. All this outer area. It's most lateral. And that most lateral region is known as your lateral hemispheres. Those are your lateral hemispheres. And with your lateral hemispheres, the specific functional region is known as your cerebellum. Okay, lateral hemispheres are associated with cerebellum. So the three basic areas, vestibulocerebellum, balance, spinocerebellum versus both vermis and paravermal areas. That's going to be your spinocerebellum, non-conscious proprioception, information from your body. And then you have your lateral hemispheres. It's also known as your cerebrocerebellum. And with a name like cerebrocerebellum, what do you think that has to do with? Any thoughts? Anybody? Your brain, yeah. What about, when you think about cerebrum, what do you think about? Thinking, yeah. So this is cerebrocerebellum is thinking about moving. It's not conscious, but so that's the part where you're thinking about moving. Does anybody remember we talked about the premotor cortex and the supplementary motor area? that's in front of the precentral gyrus, what does that have to do with? Motor planning. And you remember what fed into those areas? Cerebellum. Remember, the cerebellum was one of the basal ganglia, cerebellum, all that stuff feeds information in. And this is the part of the brain, the latter part of the cerebellum, the lateral hemisphere is going to be the one that feeds into this. So it's thinking about movement, but it's also complex motor task, coordination. So putting together all those motor tasks. And this is the part of the brain that's going to communicate. Information about that. Questions? 3 different areas. Spinocerebellum, vestibulocerebellum, and cerebrocerebellum. Cerebrocerebellum associated with lateral hemisphere, spinocerebellum associated with vermis and paravermal, floccular nodular lobes associated with the vestibular cerebellum. Vestibular cerebellum is involved in balance. Spinocerebellum, non-conscious proprioception. And lateral hemisphere, cerebrocerebellum is thinking about moving, planning complex movements. Questions? Okay, now all of these functional regions have associated nuclei. Okay. The functional regions by themselves receive the afferent information coming in from the environment, and the nuclei receive that information and then put out efferent information. Okay, when we're thinking about these areas, here's your floccular nodular lobe. Floccular nodular lobe, as well as the vermis, is associated with a pair of nuclei. And those nuclei I'll represent here. So both the vermis as well as the floccular nodular lobe are associated with this pair of nuclei, and they're called fastigial, F-A-S-T-I-D-U-A-L, fastigial nuclei. So it should be an I. Fastigial nuclei. Okay, and they're associated with the vermis. Okay, any information coming from the vermis goes through your vestigial nucleus, and they're also associated here with this floccular nodular lobe. It also works through the vestigial nucleus. So, vermis, floccular nodular go through the vestigial nucleus. Okay, next set of nuclei. They all come in pairs, one for the right side, one for the left side. Next set of nuclei are going to be 2 different nuclei, but we're going to call them as a pair together. Give them their own name as the pair. Okay, these pair of nuclei are known as the interposed nuclei. I-N-T-E-R-P-O-S-E-D, nuclei. Interposed nuclei. Okay, floccular nodular and vermis uses vestigial nuclei. Interposed nuclei are used by the paravermal region. If the paravermal region uses the interposed nuclei, what kind of information is processed by the interposed nuclei? Of the extremities, yes. Non-conscious proprioception of extremities. Good. That's exactly how to think about it. And the vermis uses vestigial, non-conscious proprioception of the trunk muscles. This guy processes information about non-conscious proprioception of the extremities. And then the last one is something we're going to go back into the lab and do some brain sections and look to see what we see. We're actually going to see it. And it, to me, looks like a half a set of teeth. Okay, there's one on both sides. It's actually it looks just like that. You're going to see the gray matter. The nucleus is the gray matter. You're going to actually see it, and it looks just like that. And it's easy to remember because it's called dentate. D-E-N-T-A-T-E. Dentate nuclei. Dentate or teeth. And it's your dentate nuclei that receive information from your from your cerebrocerebellum, thinking about moving. So that's your lateral receives information from the lateral hemispheres. So that's your cerebellum. Okay, so in general, three main functional regions to worry about as far as the cerebellum is concerned. Floccular nodular lobes associated with balance, also known as the vestibulocerebellum. The vermis and the paravermis together comprise the spinal cerebellum, and that's involved non-conscious proprioception of the trunk for the vermis and extremities for the paravermal area. And then your lateral hemisphere is the very outside part, so it's your cerebrocerebellum, thinking about thinking. Each of these regions use a specific set of nuclei. Okay, the vermis, floccular nodular lobe, use your fastigial nuclei. Interposed nuclei is used by your paravermal region, and your dentate are used by your lateral hemispheres. Questions? And we're going to start to put one more piece in before we look at the pathways. What do we do with that? Let's look at the fibers and Purkinje. It should be a Purkinje. Purkinje. So fibers and Purkinje cells. This is the one presentation with all the fun words in it, right? So again, this is going to be a sagittal section through the brainstem, and there's your cerebellum. I drew in a couple of main conduits here that we haven't talked about before. Let's go ahead and label some parts. So if I had to say, this is the top part of the brainstem, so that's my midbrain. Okay, middle part of the brainstem is going to be my pons. Bottom part is going to be my medulla. Okay, back here, behind the brainstem, it's going to be my cerebellum. Okay, a couple of conduits. When we were looking at what I call the penguin of Madagascar view, we labeled this thing here, and this is those major conduits. This is just half. There's one on the other side too. There's two of them. This is the middle cerebellar peduncle. This area is just a major conduit. Axons coming down, actually coming across from pontine nuclei, are going to come in through here to your middle cerebellar peduncle and communicate with your cerebellum. Okay, so this is my middle cerebellar peduncle. Any guesses as to what this one's called? Superior. That's your superior cerebellar peduncle. Okay, you really don't see it on any particular view, and we'll see it when we look at cross sections of the brainstem toward the end of the semester. Because instead of positioned like straight forward and back, it's more on an angle, so you don't really see it when you look at another view. Okay, this is superior, middle, and down here is going to be my inferior cerebellar peduncle. And we're going to see that the majority of the afferent information coming in from the environment into the cerebellum is going to enter in through this inferior cerebellar peduncle. We're gonna see that here in a minute when we look at specific pathways. But not all information, but the majority of it is going to come in through your inferior cerebellar peduncle. And thinking about the medulla, we had gone through and looked at the different parts of the medulla. And if I told you that this front, there's two bumps here. This front bump is where the corticospinal tract decussates. Does anybody know what that's called? Pyramid. It's going to be one of your pyramid. Okay, and behind the pyramid, I also labeled something that was another bump right behind it. Does anybody remember the name of that? Olive. Awesome. You remembered. Okay, and that's called an olive for a very specific reason. Inside the olive, what makes that great big bump, there's a nucleus. It's a special nucleus that's associated with cerebellar function. You can see it's such a big nucleus, it makes a great big bump and really important in motor learning. This is known as the inferior olivary nucleus. Okay, your inferior olivary nucleus is inside that olive bump in the medulla. Okay, now, just for an example, I'm going to take one nucleus that I talked about before. You can be vestigial, it can be interposed, it can be dentate, doesn't matter. I'm just going to represent that as one round circle. So let's just say, let's just make it a generic. So this is a deep cerebellar nucleus. We're going to look at how information is communicated to that nucleus. So that's just any old deep cerebellar nucleus. In addition to the deep cerebellar nucleus, I have this funny word up here, Purkinje cell. I'm going to draw in one Purkinje cell. My Purkinje cell, I always think that the top kind of looks like an onion or an onion character or whatever, something like that. Okay, it's a special kind of cell, and there's the cell body. The cell body has an axon, and the Purkinje cell connects up with its deep cerebellar nucleus. Let me label that. So the Purkinje cell is nothing more than a relayer of information to the deep cerebellar nucleus. They're Purkinje cells that there's hundreds of thousands of them, and they line every different cerebellar functional region. We're going to see that here in a minute. But the most important thing to know is your Purkinje cells are hooked up with the deep cerebellar nucleus, or the deep cerebellar nucleus is involved. Now there's one more thing to think about. Talked about previously the spinocerebellar fibers coming in, so there's dorsal and ventral. So they come down from here. Think about coming in from the spinal cord. Okay, I have my dorsal and spinal cerebellar fibers coming in here. They're going to come up. They're going to go through my inferior cerebellar peduncle, and they're going to make a connection with my Purkinje fiber. Okay, and then there's also going to be, that's the dorsal spinal cerebellar, and then there's also going to be another, the ventral spinal cerebellar is kind of different. It comes in and it goes in through, up here through the superior cerebellar peduncle, but as it comes in, it's going to make a connection with my Purkinje cell. And then we're going to talk about the last pathway that comes in, comes down from the cerebrum, and comes down here and goes through the middle cerebellar peduncle. But again, it's going to make a connection with my Purkinje cell. And so the point of this is that all three of these pathways that we're going to talk about are going to make specific connections with their specific Purkinje cell in their functional region, which is already hooked up to the deep cerebellar nucleus. That makes sense? Maybe it will as we go. And these fibers, all these fibers that are considered afferent information coming into the cerebellum are known as mossy fibers. So all the pink are M-O-S-S-Y fibers. And that's nothing more than afferent information into the cerebellum. Like I said, we're going to talk about any kind of fiber providing afferent information coming into the cerebellum is going to be called a mossy fiber. Most important thing to know about the mossy fibers is they only make contact with the Purkinje cell. Okay, and their job is nothing more than to convey all that information, whether it's thinking about moving, whether it's going to be non-conscious proprioception information coming in, or whether it's going to be information about balance coming from your vestibular system. All that information comes in here and it connects to the Purkinje cell. Okay. The Purkinje cell is then responsible for receiving all this information and conveying it to the deep cerebellar nucleus that makes the decision about what to do. And with that decision comes the efferent information coming from the deep cerebellar nucleus, comes out, majority of it goes through the superior cerebellar peduncle and moves on. Okay, and this is your efferent information coming from your deep cerebellar nuclei. So Purkinje cell receives all that information, conveys it to the nuclei. Nuclei has this information and then makes a decision about what to do and sends appropriate output efferently up to the, well, depending on where it's going. But if it's going up, it's going to go to your supplementary motor area or your premotor cortex. So you've got two things going on. This guy is receiving all the information. This guy's making a decision about what to do with that information and sending it forward. Does that make sense? That way, this guy, the inferior olivary nucleus, very special nucleus because it's the only one. It sends out a different kind of fiber. These aren't mossy fibers. They're called something else. But it sends out fibers to both the Purkinje cell, okay, and it also sends out fibers that make contact with the deep cerebellar nucleus. So any fibers that come out of the inferior olivary nucleus, they're the only fibers that make contact with both the Purkinje cell, the information collector, and the deep cerebellar nuclei, the decision maker. Okay? What do you think? And these are called climbing fibers, as opposed to mossy fibers. Climbing fibers. So given that the inferior olivary nucleus knows what information was collected and what was decided, what do you think the inferior olivary nucleus might be involved in? Any thoughts? You're going to have a whole class on it next semester. Really important in motor learning. Motor learning. In other words, it's keeping track of what was put into your Purkinje cell, and it's also keeping track of what you decide to do with it. So if the outcome was good, then you don't have to change anything. But if the outcome wasn't good, you might have to do some adjustment. Okay, and that's all about motor learning. Wonderful thing. Okay, let's take a break.
Yeah, but what did you say there specifically?
Not yet. Don't know yet. Okay. You'll find out here in a bit. Okay. Question?
Orient these cross sections for me again.
Yeah, sure. This is a straight sagittal section, so the only time you can see this flutter or nodular lobe is when you remove the brainstem.
Okay, so this is just looking at it from the side. Now, if you take this with the brainstem in the front, you move it that way, and then you take away the brainstem. This is what you see. So here's your flacculonodular lobe. Here's your middle cerebellar peduncles, which is those conduits that pass through. They're in here. Actually, there's one here, and then there's one on the other side over here. And then
So this is if the brainstem, or the brainstem was right here, it took it away, right? Okay, now I can see.
you're looking this way, and then this one, you're looking this way, and I just put the flacculonodular lobe, which you'll see a lot in textbooks, but you can't see it there.
Perfect. There you go.
Question?
Yes. You have two little circles on the mossy fibers.
Two of the circles, I'm sorry, two.
Excuse me.
Oh, let me turn that off.
Like right here. Like those aren't like